Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is James and welcome back to the Soundline. Today we are looking at the brand new, just released Nordost Q Base Mark III. I've also got with me here the QBASE Mark II. These are 8-way power distribution boards for your hi-fi system or home theater system. Basically today I'm just going to be talking about the differences or the upgrades made on the Mark III versus the Mark II. We've spent a good couple of days really listening to the differences between these with a variety of different cables and figured out what we believe the fundamental sonic differences to be between these. So I'll talk just about the physical differences first, some of the changes they've made, and then I'll move on to the sound and we'll go from there. If you think power products make no difference to hi-fi, tell us in the comments below why. So, physical differences, just to get started. Looking at it from the outside, they look very similar. The main difference that you see right away is they have made the ends black. And then the only other difference I can really see on the outside is that the Mark III appears to be a slightly more shinier finish than the Mark II. So I actually really like the way it looks. These black bits, by the way, are still solid aluminium, just like they are in the Mark II. I know on camera they sometimes have a tendency to look a bit plasticky because they're matte black finish, but it is all really solid metal construction. Internal differences. So what have they actually done to the Mark III to make it a step up over the Mark II? Well, for starters, they have separated the earth trace completely from the phase and neutral. So in the Mark II, they've got a PCB in here with big thick tracks that's got live, neutral and earth all running parallel to one another. In the Mark III, they've taken the earth trace and separated it out onto its own PCB and put it physically as far apart from the live and neutral as they can. They've put them right at the very sides. The idea behind that is to reduce eddy currents. It also means that it gets to use the chassis as a great big sink, I believe, to help reduce eddy currents. The other difference that they've made is they have made the traces thicker. I mean, that's always a good idea when you're dealing with power, just make your wire generally as thick as possible. So they've made the traces thicker. The Mark III has the carbon monofilament wiring used from the traces to the ports themselves. I'm 95% sure that the Mark II doesn't have that. It mentions it on the Mark III's blurb on their website, but it doesn't mention it for the Mark II, so I think that's probably an upgrade they've made. Knowing the difference that their carbon monofilament wire makes in things like their Frey and Tier and Valhalla power cables, I can certainly see that being a really worthwhile change to be made to the unit. Like, those cables work really well. And that's about it in terms of actual physical differences, what they've done. Separated the earth, made all the traces thicker and used their special carbon monofilament wire to run from the traces to the plugs themselves. So, sound differences, what we hear when we do the upgrade. So we used, in our initial stages with our Accuphase gear and Sonos Faber speakers, we were using a Valhalla feed cable and a couple of Tier 10 amp cables running to the CD player and amplifier that we were using. So Valhalla Tier kind of level. The main differences we heard when listening between the Mark II and the Mark III, openness and spaciousness. The Mark III is a lot more open, deep, three-dimensional soundstage. You can really hear the background more. That's probably one of the bigger things. Actually, the background was much quieter, so you can really hear the atmosphere around the instruments a lot better. It was generally more musical. We found ourselves just enjoying it a bit more. So that's that kind of quasi-definition of, we call that more musical, and for some reason we just like it more. In terms of bass, there was definitely more control and definition on the Mark III. It was just generally cleaner and more textured when listening to bassy tracks through this. And for me, one of the big differences I noticed, because when I'm a very soundstagey focused kind of listener, the soundstage on this, at first I thought the soundstage was shorter, which is the opposite to what everyone else in the room heard, but then I realized it's not that the soundstage was shorter, it's that it was much bigger. The sound of the room was much bigger, and that made the elements inside the room appear smaller. So for instance, on this, we were listening to some Leonard Cohen, which sounded fantastic, and Leonard Cohen was big and powerful, kind of the sort of thing you expect to have at a concert. When we listened to it on this, for me, he was much smaller, and I thought, oh, it's the soundstage shorter, but then I realized this was just resolving how big the stadium and the atmosphere around him was. So to that end, it basically means that scale was far more controlled and accurate on this. You know, he's not a big dude. He should be perceived as, you know, it's a big concert, so it should be powerful sounding, but he's not meant to sound like he's larger than life. So scale, much more accurate on this. And the other thing that I found personally was that the separation of the elements was just way more clean and clear. The drums and the vocals and the trumpet and everything sounded like their own element, whereas on the Mark II, they sounded more closely compressed, if that makes sense. On this, they were just more separated. You could perceive each instrument if you really wanted to. You could just listen to one instrument at a time and hear them clearly on their own. So, in terms of whether or not you should upgrade, it depends a little bit on what your cables are, but generally speaking, we thought that the Mark III was a worthwhile upgrade. The question arose from some of our customers here. They would say to us, well, I've got a QB8 Mark II with these cables. Should I upgrade to the Mark III, or should I spend that money and keep the Mark II? Should I spend that money instead on a better feed cable? If you have a QB8 with all red dawns going into it and coming out of it, like a red dawn loom, and you're wondering, should I either buy a Mark III QB8 or should I buy a Fray power cable to feed it? The answer to us was very, very obvious. We would say, buy the Mark III QB8 rather than the Fray. That made more of a difference. If you've got a Fray already feeding your system, you're wondering, should I buy a Mark III or should I buy a tier cable to feed the QB8? I think we all agreed we did prefer that the Mark III to the tier upgrade. We thought it was just, you know, better presentation and better layering and that sort of thing, but it was a much closer comparison than the previous test with the red dawns and the Frays. So I can imagine someone saying, actually, personally, I prefer the sound of the tier on the Mark II to the Fray on the Mark III. Hi-fi is subjective, it all comes down to what you like. We all agreed that this sounded better, but it was a smaller amount. We will do more testing with this as time goes on. If you have any questions about whether or not you think you should do the upgrade based on what cables you have, feel free to put them down in the comments section below. So that's pretty much it from us today, guys. QB8 Mark III, we're really happy. Sounds fantastic. I'll catch you in the next video.